welcome to the Phoenix Downbeat, the 10th episode of the Phoenix Downbeat. You know, when I first got into podcasting, which I realize now has been over 10 years, Ira and I are about to celebrate the 8th anniversary of the Everything is Final Fantasy podcast, formerly called Final Fantasy Weekly. Way back in the day, I was told if your podcast gets into the double digits, it's got legs. It's got a reason to exist. It's going to have a fan base and it will continue to be a thing. I don't know if that's still so much has changed since I first started podcasting. I don't know if that's still a thing, but happy double digits, guys. It does feel like this is a real show and we can do it for a while.
We're a real show.
Yeah, exactly. And on this episode of this very real podcast, I'm Drew Kreisman. He's Ira Kreisman. That's Ryan Laney of Airship Overdrive. Make sure to subscribe to Airship Overdrive on the YouTube, by the way, if you've not done that yet. We're wrapping up, I think, our series on Overworlds with Final Fantasies VII, VIII, and IX. I'm always down to hear other people make some arguments that other games have Overworlds in the series and that we should visit those in the future. But for now, pretty sure that these are it. And what a collection of pieces of music we have to listen to today, Ryan.
Yeah, this is going to be quite the variety. Like we talked in recent episodes, talking about 1, 2, and 3, and then 4, 5, and 6 Overworld. We spoke a little bit about how in 1, 2, and 3, it was like Uematsu was kind of doing great songwriting, but it was very formulaic and it was modeled after a lot of kind of classical romantic era music. 4, 5, and 6, you hear him start to try really finding how does this whole video game soundtrack thing work? And then now today, going into 7, 8, and 9, I argue that we're going to see a lot of stuff where he really has a great mastery of how to make a video game soundtrack that really sounds like him, sounds like Final Fantasy. And there's not a whole lot more of this searching for how to make a soundtrack. He's got it. He has the mastery of it at this point. And we're going to hear some really interesting takes on Overworld music and talk through them, analyze them a little bit. And there's only 3 this time. We don't have a bunch like how 5 and 6 had a whole lot of them. There's just 3 songs to look at today primarily.
Yeah, and I have a lot of thoughts that I thought about giving as setup, but we're going to dive into all those. So the only thing I want to do as framework here is mention that with Final Fantasy VII's main theme, we're going to need to break it up into bits and pieces. The way that it is structured is very different from any other overworld theme. Most video game music, actually, as we've talked about, tends to loop within a minute or 2, maybe 3 if it's a really long loop. And this is like a 6.5 minute long opus that greets you 10 hours into the game. And I'm sure we'll dive into that. But it is remarkable that for, I'm sure, reasons we'll get into, this is such a long, varied piece. I know it doesn't have movements in the way you would think of, classical composers who have movements that last 20 or 30 minutes long, but it feels like that, right? It has movements.
Yeah. That's actually a really good point I didn't think about until just now. You don't really hear this until the end of disc 1. Like, you really don't hear the overall theme for Final Fantasy VII. You hear hints of like the melody and a couple other songs, but you don't hear this song until you actually leave Midgar and get into the overworld, which is really bizarre because most games, Overworld's one of the very first themes you hear when you leave your little starting town or starting dungeon or something. But this one, it waits. It gives you that setup before you even hear the overworld. That's actually pretty unique.
Interesting, right? Ira, any thoughts? Do you want to listen to the first bit?
Well, the first thing I want to say about the beginning of this piece, but we'll wait.
I do. We'll get into that. I've got it pulled up.
Yeah, and for this one, for the folks at home, the 7 theme, like Drew said, it's like 6 minutes long, and so we're gonna kind of break it down to some time-stamped points where it's got like a distinct change of some kind or something different happening. For 8 and 9, they're way simpler, and we'll probably just listen to them once and then talk about them. So expect this episode to be a lot of 7 and then a little bit of 8, a little bit of 9. already setting the stage so well. Ira, what were you going to say about this?
Oh, the very beginning is the same as Danny Elfman's Batman theme.
It's real close, isn't it? It's like almost note
Yeah,
for note.
yeah,
And
yeah. I just think that's interesting. I think it's fun.
it's funny you mentioned that because just about a week or two ago, my wife and I we watched Glass Onion, Knives Out, and there's a quick little quote of the Batman theme when the detective is talking to someone and he says, "Oh, I'm no Batman, I'm no Bruce Wayne," and in the background it actually plays a very little hint of the Danny Elfman Batman theme. But Drew, play it for us. You
Nice.
got hooked up already. Melodic motive was put in there. Did you hear that little bell theme partway through?
Yes. Yes.
That's
And
Genova.
the bells themselves. When we talked about the soundtrack for this game, and I did my best to rank the top 40 pieces of music on it, which was very silly and a lot of fun. But I talked about one of my favorite recurring motifs. I just called them the Final Fantasy VII bells. These chimey bells that appear up here and there. And I think of them as the voice of the live stream. And so we also talked about how Uematsu was more in a Danny Elfman type mode for a lot of this soundtrack. And so I think I would not be at all shocked if he had been listening to this and those bells and all that stuff was just in his subconscious. And he was like, I've got a different take on this same type of idea.
Yeah. And what you just said is actually really spot on when talking about like the life stream and the story of Final Fantasy VII. I'm going to assume all the listeners roughly know the story of Final Fantasy VII here. But when it was in production, before like it was actually kind of set in stone of what was the story was going to be, the environment and everything, the original storyline was going to be much more of like a murder mystery type thing. And Cloud's character was called something like Hot Blooded Joe or Cold Blooded Joe. And he was always chasing the man in black. And they kind of adapted a couple of those things and kept them, but then they changed obviously a lot of things. Even though most of the game it's still Cloud and crew chasing after Sephiroth, right? There's still
And
that.
for some fun extra trivia, a lot of those other ideas ended up in a game called Parasite Eve.
Yes.
That takes place in New York City because Final Fantasy VII was originally actually going to take place in the real world. They have only now crossed that bridge with the most recent Dissidia game being apparently in the real world, which is fascinating. But I love that. That's incredible.
Yeah, Square Enix, or if it was called Square still, there were definitely a lot of teams throwing ideas back and forth between the games, and there were things that were going to go from like the Xenogears games into Vagrant Story into Final Fantasy games. They all kind of like just shared stuff and borrowed things that might have appeared somewhere else but didn't. But in this case here with this song, yes, the theme there sounds really close to the Batman theme. And when we hear it later, slightly transposed, it's almost even closer to that. I wouldn't surprise me if Uematsu heard that soundtrack and he was inspired by it, heard something great. He does this all the time where he's hearing music from various different sources around him and incorporating it into his music. One thing I want to point out with this theme here, and it starts off just in a good old G major, is it's actually a major theme that I have my term that I'll use for it, but give us a listen and just let me know for Drew and Ira, what term or terms would you use to describe just this part of the melody?
I already used The Sun Coming Up for Robin Oster, but it's got a similar, especially those first couple of notes. But then it with that last note that comes down, it's like it's not the sun is coming up, but it's cold out. There's a chill in the air. There's a fog, right? You can see your breath. So sure, the sun is rising, but it's not a bright, warm summer day.
I could see that.
This is, I mean, we've left the Empire at this point. It's like you were saying, we're 10 hours into the game and we've finally gotten out of the shadow of Midgar. Except that if you're close to Midgar, it's still kind of dark, and it's only as you leave the area that the screen starts to brighten up. And so this piece, especially the introduction, feels a little bit like there might be a little bit of relief, but the shadow of the Empire, the corporate empire, remains. And so, especially as we keep moving on, there's more tension, more we're not done yet to part of that theme.
Yeah, and Ira's hitting it on the nail on the head right there. This concept of yes, things have gotten better. We've left the shadow of the empire, quote unquote, Shinra, all that stuff, but we're not quite there yet. We're not quite done. So that concept I wanted to marry with the concept of this mystery, trying to find the person and responsible for all the stuff that's going on. Not strictly, Sephiroth's not really the bad guy for a lot of this game, but he's the driving source of them adventuring and going out, right? I'm going to play the melody again. I'm going to change one note and let me know how this sounds different. How's that sound
that was
different?
Very disconcerting.
Why?
Yeah, I don't know. Without it resolving or something, it feels, it just, that it keeps going up is unsettling to me for whatever reason. I don't know why.
But Drew, how's that possible? We resolved on a perfect major chord in perfect position.
Did we?
How could that sound unresolved and disconcerting to you?
I don't know. That's not why you were here.
So this is the concept that we're talking about here, which is that this melody here, this theme, which we're going to break down more as we go through it. There's this constant sense of I'm almost there. I've almost got it. And then the target is moved at the last second, or I just barely was out of reach. I missed something, whatever the case is. These notes that we hear at the beginning, it's literally just in a major scale, 1, 2, 3, and then 7, which would normally lead to 8. And that gives you a nice resolution. But instead of resolving up to the octave, it goes down to the 6. And so that 6 is not part of your usual 1, 3, 5 chord tone. It's not diatonic to the chord G major, but it still sounds like it's somewhat resolved, but not resolved. So we get this instead. And then right away, we suddenly make a massive diversion into F minor. And we just keep moving the target on the listener. We're going to see this more throughout this piece, but I encourage, for Drew and Ira here, for the listeners at home, keep track of all the times. There's one in particular I'm going to point out big time that happens later, where it feels like the melody or the structure is going somewhere, and then it just curveballs, and it's just oh, now we're going this way. Okay, weird. I argue that's tied into the story directly. So as we go forward, listen for those moments where you expect one thing, but you get something else.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. Another thing that's always struck me about this particular element of the song you're talking about is, and you must have had me in mind of this, we'd been listening to your Octopath Traveler piece last time, and in the beginning of it, we there's that getting started and fumbling around we talked about kind of before you get into playing it, right? And there feels a bit of this, on the one hand, it almost feels like Nobuo Uematsu going, la da 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 da, no, la da 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 da, no, not that way. But also our characters throughout these stories take a lot of missteps, fail a lot, and are wrong, especially in Final Fantasy VII. It's the first Final Fantasy game where we have misleading narration, right? The unreliable narrator and big twists and a bunch of chunks of the story that we're told that later turn out to not be true. And so I think that the melody begins with several different possible iterations of this concept. It almost feels like, no, not there. Or memory. Ira and I have talked about the imperfection of memory and how this game is definitely about that. So this bit also feels like somebody going, does it go la da 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 or la da 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 da? And, it's
And then even then, when he kind of roots himself into mostly F minor in the second half of this little part we played here, it still has the melody start on an almost chord tone, but not quite. That's a great way of explaining it, where it's it sounds like he kind of has where he's supposed to go, kind of has the idea, but it's not settled yet. It's still fumbling around trying to find the right direction.
I already have anything. We want to listen to the next bit.
Let's listen to the next bit.
what's happening now?
I feel like that's just far more pleasant for whatever reason. I guess the ice is starting to thaw a bit. The fog is lit. When Ira was talking a bit about leaving behind the fog of Midgar, I of course immediately thought of Mako. But then my brain jumped to like some of those documentaries you've seen of like Gettysburg and like the morning after a battle, and all the smoke is still kind of hanging around. But after a while, it does lift. The sun gets higher in the sky. The day does get warmer even in those colder months. And this feels like that bit to me.
Yeah, this whole part feels it's the same lines, or at least pretty close to the same lines, but a little gentler, a little more pastoral, bucolic even. It's gentler. It's
yeah,
nicer.
absolutely. It's nicer, it's more pleasant, and there's a reason why, believe it or not. We're now in E major primarily, and for this section we just listened to, it is by and large it is diatonic. We are in the key of E major, and it generally stays there, with one exception that I'm going to point out here in a second. And even when the chord structures are changing below it, they're generally still staying in the key of E major, even if it means going to a minor key that's diatonic to it. So for example, we start off with a good old just E major triad, and then we go to C sharp minor. And there's that little bit of a strain note at the top because we still hear this. No resolution there yet. Now it's resolved, which is different from the first time we heard it. But then instead of going from E to C sharp minor, he changes it. And I have a feeling that Drew is going to have one of those mind blow moments, because when we go from it the second time now, we get this instead. Does anything sound familiar with what I just played?
I mean, I've heard that phrase so many times. I'm only in Final Fantasy VII again. Is there a way to give me another trick hint?
Listen to the chords below.
Okay.
He put the same flat 6, flat 7, 1 progression like in the victory fanfare right here in the main theme of this.
Like you showed us how
it's
he did
amazing.
The prelude too. Oh, that is.
Yep.
Oh.
He sneaks it in all over the place, and there's other places in Final Fantasy VII soundtrack. I think he even does it a couple more times in this one song here. He likes to sneak it in there because even though it's not like an overbearingly obvious chord progression when you're listening for it, it's just, or when you're not listening for it rather, it's still just so like pleasing to the ear. It has this very nice just step up motion that is out of the key. It's non-diatonic technically, but it's one of the easiest ways to remove yourself into what's called borrowed chord territory and then work your way right back to the 1 key. So we end back in E major again. Aside from that, a lot of it is very much the same, working on the same stuff. And then towards the end, he does it in a similar way where we're now moving into a different key entirely, focusing more still in E major, but we're kind of based around F sharp minor of sorts. Is there anything else you guys wanted to look at or listen to in that section we just listened to?
No, I guess the only other thing that I would say is that Ira and I have talked about before how sometimes his music writing mirrors storytelling, story writing, and this has a very similar, like we had a little prologue, and now this feels very chapter 1, and we're also, I know what we're building to, like this next bit is so climactic. It's so like we've put all these ideas in your head. He's laid the groundwork. He's foreshadowed, right? And now he's going to say, and here's the big, I'm going to, for the second time, use the word opus for some reason on this episode. I don't even think I've used it right either time.
Opus, for those of us listening at home, opus is a cataloged, completed work by somebody. So you would say it's like, like you don't really use it these days, especially with like soundtracks. You don't really call them opuses, but you could say that the whole soundtrack is an opus technically.
Yeah.
But you're spot on though, because with and you actually gave me a good segue. I'll explain this now. In that story writing element to what's happening here, I'd argue the first section we listened to is the entirety of Midgar. in like the first Midgar section in one area, it sounds generally pleasing, but there's always these moments of tension of like, oh, something's not right. And if you remember, I don't know if you guys can recall, but do you know what I think is the first time we actually hear some semblance of the da 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 da? Do you remember where it happens in the game?
No, he sneaks it into some of the early town music and the underground music. I know that might be the first time. Is it in the church music for a minute? I'd have to go. No,
Not
off the top of my
not
head.
that I can think of.
Yeah.
The first one that I can think of, it's when you're infiltrating Shinra, and there's that kind of doom, 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 and there's really intense strings, and you hear this really intense tremolo string. Da, 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 da,
Yeah.
and that's the first time we actually hear it in the game. So to me, it feels like all of that first section listened to, that's Midgar, that's infiltrating Shinra, all the stuff that's happening in there. We're getting a hint of the overworld theme to come shortly, but it still has the dissonance of, hey, Sephiroth and Shinra, they're behind all of this. There's no happiness anytime soon, truly. And then what we just listened to now, this is, oh, you're in the actual world and we're actually progressing our story. So I'll prompt the two of you and listeners at home to then guess what might this next section be referring to in the greater FF7 story. And yes, you stopped right where I was hoping we would stop.
Okay.
So before that, though, this whole section, how do you think this relates to the story of Final Fantasy VII? What's happening that we're being foreshadowed?
I've got two things that I hear when I hear this part.
Go for it.
The first bit with the sort of pizzicato sound, it sounds to me like an attempt at a piano, a kind of piano, the high notes.
Yeah, it's like a music boxy sort of sound.
Okay, and we get that in Final Fantasy a lot. Bart's in particular has that music box sound. But I think of it as a piano, and piano I think of, in this game, I think piano specifically represents Tifa. So for me, that bit is the relationship between Tifa and her pals. And then we move on into the, we finally get some percussion going and the horns, and that is the more cinematic part. And when Drew and I were talking about this game, we juxtaposed Final Fantasy VI's operatic tendencies, especially when people would look at the audience and tell us what's going on, versus Final Fantasy VII's cinematic tendencies. This one's the blockbuster, which is why the partial Batman theme is also at least somewhat appropriate, right? So this combines those two aspects to me: the dear friends part of the piano music box sound and the big cinematic. We're gonna make it sound into the next part.
Yeah, what was that? Both of the things you were gonna mention?
Yeah. So the sort of the pizzicato-y sounds near the beginning of that part, and the big drums and horns at the end.
Okay, Drew, you have any takes?
I have several. There are a lot of things I feel like this really could be. We talked with Terra's theme in Final Fantasy VI about the building up of the instruments and the building up of the team. So as more and more stuff comes in here, I start thinking Red becomes more a part of the team, and we meet Sid and we meet Vincent, and we're going out in the world. We're also learning and discovering, meeting people like Bugenhagen who are telling us about the live stream, and so now it's not just this one city battle against a mega corporation, but we're really taking a global perspective, but also really the team coming together and building up to have a sort of bigger, grander purpose beyond what every individual's like entering the story with their own motives was. They all come to have this sort of more grand unified purpose.
Yeah. So I'm kind of in the middle of both of those, oddly enough. I think the instrumentation and kind of the chord structures and the very easy to follow melodic structures of the whole, like do 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 da 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 da. It sounds very pleasant, right? But it's mostly set in a minor setting. I've always heard this when you look at the song form in general, how it relates to the story of Final Fantasy VII, is that we're basically looking at Cloud, our main character of the story. It's his relationship with three things. His relationship with Tifa, as Ira just mentioned, and just kind of this sense of like childhood nostalgia in some senses as well. His relationship with his own past, where he's trying to kind of have this nostalgia for himself of trying to figure out, wait, who the heck actually am I? What was my story? And then also his relationship and the party's relationship with Aerith in general. Because to me, it feels like this is where we're in the story of going, oh, wow, one of our own has died. Like she is gone. And then like Drew was just saying, what's our bigger purpose? And that's why the next part we're going to look into here, it feels like it's really pushing into this intense, this massively like stronger version of the main theme. Oh, we had our purpose before. It was to stop Shinra, but now we know it's to stop Sephiroth. It's to stop Meteor from destroying us all. It's to stop, the weapons and everything. It's to stop all these awful things happening at the same time. Here's that kind of recharged moment to now bring us into kind of the second and third parts of the game more properly. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my argument, at least. And then this part here that I asked Drew to stop on right before it happened was there's some interesting things that they do with the end of this stuff. And I'm going to share you a link in the chat here. Have you guys ever heard of something called a Picardy third by chance in music terminology?
I don't think so.
If I have, it would have been 25 years ago.
So I'm gonna send you guys a little link here. Give me 1 second. And for those of us at home, this is the wonderful piano player Vikingur Olafsson playing a Bach prelude. It's specifically the Prelude and Fugue in C minor, BWV 847. And it should start on the timestamp I sent you, Drew. It should start around the 230, 232 mark, somewhere in there. And what we're hearing is this is going to be something that's mostly set in C minor, as the title implies. But listen to how this song ends. It's only about maybe 10 or 20 seconds before the ending actually hits. It's very short. But listen to how we're in a clearly minor, very dissonant setting. And then hear how the very last chord sounds. How's it end?
I don't know.
Was that Ira?
It's doing its thing. It's set everything up, and then it ends with a just kind of a nicer chord note. It actually kind of reminds me of the end of Liberi Fatale when I can't remember what you called it, a sus chord, sustained chord.
Yes, it was an F sus chord. Spot on.
And that always feels to me like kind of a sigh of relief. Had the big fight, and there's the witches in the air, and lightning and fire magic and swords clashing. and there's kind of a hey. That it feels like a similar idea. It's almost a sigh of relief after all the tension of the fast notes.
Yeah, what I'll play it in a very simplified form here on the piano, but basically what's happening is we're taking this little melody here, and it's putting it in a way where it doesn't quite sound like it should end in minor. And again, it's a simplified version of it with some chords now. That's where it feels like it should end. It should end on C minor because we've been in C minor this whole time. But what it does instead is something kind of like this. And all it does is it just changes that third note of the scale from an E flat to an E major. It goes from C minor to C major. This is called a Picardy third in music theory stuff, where basically it sounds like something that's in minor, it's heavily based in minor, but they end the very, very, very final chord on what's called the parallel major. So in this case, if it's in C minor, your last chord will be C major instead. And if you hear like a really simple chord progression between those, the minor ending doesn't quite have the same like resolution as if you end it on major instead.
Yeah.
And it feels like you're kind of like, oh, you're just done. And there's various ways to use it, but as we're listening to the Final Fantasy VII overworld theme now, we're going to hear this happen every now and then, where we hear something that he's trying to take it from, like, you know, let's see, and it goes into a minor instead, or do it the other way around where it's major and then he progresses in, or it's in minor and he goes to a major key to resolve and go to the next thing. So as you're listening to the ends of these phrases in this middle section particularly, listener at home, listen to see if you can tell when it ends on something that's more like a major, like an E major type thing, versus like a more E minor type thing. And he kind of throws it back and forth. Drew, before you play the next section, go ahead and, if you don't mind, like rewind to like maybe 3:15 or so, and then just keep going through to our next timestamp. And listeners, listen for those moments where it's like, oh, I expected a minor resolution, but I got major instead, or the other way around. I expected major, but I got minor instead. I saw Ira's eyebrows do the little oh at one point there, because it went to that sudden E minor when it was leading you to think, oh, hey, we're probably going to hear E major again. Oh,
Definitely transitions us into a nice minor there at the end, doesn't he?
for sure. It really does. We get more of these dissonant, more spread out things. How would you, or what do you guys think in terms of the greater Seven storyline? What's happening here in that little last section we listened to?
You first, Drew.
This is, I don't know. This is a tough one. I kind of used a big middle segment of the game for my last answer, and I don't feel like we're quite to the summoning of Meteor. Maybe it's to the going to space. It's the just before, and it's to some of the stuff that kind of represents. I think our next bit, to spoil the answer to the next question, is post the summoning of Meteor. I think it's supposed to represent, right, the fall of man and the coming apocalypse.
Yeah, and what you're describing is actually spot on without even realizing it, I think, because if the next section is, oh, there's the bad thing we have to stop, then what might that last section be?
This section feels very lonely to me because we get pared down to a single string or a small set of strings or string-like instruments. So it could be Cloud on his own, lost in his own thoughts, which is not a good thing for Mr. Strife. I'm lost in my own thoughts all the time, but it's not near as traumatic. Yeah, he's having a tough time on his own. Everyone has to go off and do other things. So it could be about that part of the game.
Oh, I think I got it. I think I got it.
Okay, Drew's got
because there's also a point that I was totally going to forget to make, and we're almost 40 minutes in, haven't even gotten to the next two games, and I don't care yet because this is awesome. This is sometimes called Cloud's theme because Cloud doesn't have any other pronounced theme the way Tifa, Barrett, Aerith, Red all do. But if you Google or go on YouTube and search Cloud's theme, this piece of music is what comes up. So if we're looking for a moment that is this big sort of triumphant climax, but then moving into the slow, sad realization, it's Cloud coming to terms with who he really is. And the third element, the third telling of the incident in Nibelheim, and Tifa and friends pulling him out and him realizing you are a hero and you can you're not a failure or a puppet or any of those things, and you can be a hero.
So I just learned today that there's apparently a Clouds theme. I had no idea that this was considered Clouds theme before.
Right?
That's actually pretty interesting. I would say in both regards, we're on the right track. I argue that this little section, this little 8-bar or so section here, it's the feeling of being completely aimless. If the next section we're going to hear is there's the meteor, there's the bad thing Sephiroth summoned, and the weapons that are coming, here's our bad things. That's the point where you know what your objective or your dissonant factor, whatever you want to call the antagonist factor here is. You know what it is. It's identified and it's pursuable. But this little mini section here, it's almost like the person is lost, where they're like, I know bad things are happening, but what do we even do? And like we were just saying, Cloud is lost in his own thoughts frequently. We're not sure who the bad person really is. At this point, you're introduced to like Kate Sith and Reeve and all of them. And it's like, what's going on here exactly, you know?
And even in the segment right before I was talking about, right, where Cloud does discover himself, remember, he leaves the party for a while. This is something that Final Fantasy games would do with a certain amount of thematic brilliance. Is about 2/3 of the way into most of the stories, the main character leaves the party. And it feels really unusual to not have them there. And it's like Tifa and Barrett and them have to like figure some of this stuff out on their own. So being aimless, being without your leader, even though they always said Barrett was the leader. There's even jokes in the game about which one of them is the real leader. Aimless is a really great word for it too. And for that bit in the story right up until he discovers himself.
Yeah, and those two little it's kind of like on like a piano sort of instrument, but when you hear these two little lines, it's a very open, almost whole tone scale. And then on the next line, we get this little bit. And it's like, oh, it's like washing over mystery aimlessness. So put all that together, we've now had the Midgar section of the game explained. We've had the flashbacks, nostalgia, Aerith life stream section of the game explained. We've had the, oh, here's our purpose. We're going to stop Sephiroth and Shinra explained. Now we're at the part where it's like, oh, wait, maybe Sephiroth and Shinra aren't actually the main thing we're stopping because we're trying to stop Meteor from destroying us all now. And I argue that now we're going to get into the parts, spoiler, where basically here's the impending doom of Meteor killing everything, but then the life stream jumps in and saves the day, basically. Plus a little turnaround that, of course, we have to loop at some point, and so we get that turnaround that is just there kind of for the sake of having one, I would argue. But let's keep listening. And that's the loop point right there.
Wow. Yeah.
It doesn't
So
loop in the same way that we would expect other video game music to loop.
yeah, Uematsu does the thing I've referenced before where he likes to put these little like borrowed chord things, a little bit like a minor chord out of nowhere that then leads us back to the loop just to keep the ears a little bit more engaged, and so it's not just the same key over and over again. This one does some weird stuff, and since you mentioned it, I'll work backwards from what we heard at the very end there and then into the other stuff, because there's one other thing I want to point out really strong. The last chord we hear, and there's one like it just before, it's a really funky chord, and I'm going to play it here on the piano, but it's basically spelled out like this.
Ah.
Yeah, which on piano, of course, it sounds even more intense the way
Sure.
I'm voicing it. But it's a weird chord type. What it is it's basically a minor major 7 chord that also has a flat 5 in the melody. So what that sounds like is, here's what a minor chord on its own, in this case A flat minor, sounds like. Nothing weird there. But when we add the major 7 to that, it gets this awful chord, which you might also recognize from like James Bond films, because they'll often end with like this wow, 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 wow. Yeah, and it's got that like foreboding mystery, but not like in a brutal way sort of thing. So we have one of those, a minor major 7. And then they also add the flat 5, a D natural in this case, in the melody. And it's one of the most dense and complex chords you can make out of only 5 notes until you get into like true cluster chord serialism type stuff. But we're not there just yet, but he's still using it. And then we go right into the da 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 da. I'm curious why he chose to loop it this way, because he could have very easily made it like a normal part of one of the main melodies we've heard, have it just kind of slowly fade away and then go right back into it. But he chose to do it this way for some reason. And for the life of me, I can't pin down why. Do you guys have any guesses?
No, it's really fascinating that he takes it, especially because he skips segment 1. We broke this down into 5 segments today, right? When he loops it, he goes back to segment 2, so he's like skipping the thawing of the ice early, like to get you straight from. When you played that chord, I was like, oh, somebody in the black and white horror movie just dropped a glass, like, right? It was like, oh, to go straight from that back into the pleasantness, other than to sort of underscore the dichotomy of the story. Interestingly enough, I was reading through some really, really dumb arguments today about remake and rebirth and Final Fantasy VII and all this stuff, but about the tone of it, and people arguing about whether or not some of the silly stuff in the new one matches the dark and gritty tone of the original. I was like, you guys, Cloud rides a dolphin. Like, it's always been both. And so this is both a game about your best friend and girl who sold you a flower and is the spirit goddess of the earth and the air dying, and you having to deal with that and overcome it, and a story about riding a dolphin and your dog lion cat friend who has to stand up on his hind legs in his uniform, and the guy who's got a gun on his arm because of the most tragic backstory ever is also a source of comic relief most of the time, because it's both, right?
Speaking of which, I have to point out the song that plays on the boat when you're going like from Costa del Sol and Junon, like all those places. I think the song is actually called It's Difficult to Stand on Two Legs. It's called something like that. And then you see Red trying to awkwardly walk around with this goofy, like, we're all on a boat now kind of music. No, you're spot on. It covers every part of the spectrum of like tone that you can imagine. There's something else here, and well, first, Ira, do you have anything to add about the weird looping section?
Just that it feels more like a piece of music you would play in symphonic band than something else, because it doesn't really loop in that same way. You could end there, and that could be the end of the piece.
Yeah, it's an odd ending, right? And I'm sure he had a reason for it. I don't know it. I've looked up like articles on this piece and tried to figure it out. It's a mystery to me. But there's one other part in here that helps emphasize my insistence that the kind of foreboding part is where we have like meteor is coming, weapons are coming, we know what the bad things are. Did you guys catch this little thing in the bass part that is used in another song in Final Fantasy VII?
I didn't.
So
Can you give it to me
so when
again?
he's playing when he's playing the chords, do you want to play it again?
Or are you gonna do it? I was gonna say let me.
I'll play some parts here. So we have this chord or some variation of this chord going, where it's just basically a minor 7 chord. And it's very like foreboding, right? But in the bass line, we also hear this at some points. Does that sound familiar at all?
Yes, but I'm not placing it.
There's this song, I forget what it's called, but whenever a weapon appears, it's this like very intense dun 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 song that plays, and we hear that exact same melody at this part in the overworld music. Da, 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 da,
The weapons
and it
theme
transposes and whatnot. Yeah, it's basically weapons theme is what that is.
Cool. They're emerging from the earth in that bit. Even that plotting bit. I'd always just thought of this as, again, the meteor is falling and everything's dark and Sephiroth and the darkness is coming, but that it I love it so much more as a metaphor for the weapons emerging from the planet.
Yeah, the only thing I wish Uematsu had put in the overworld theme is some sort of hint to One Winged Angel. I can't find it aside from like really, tenuous grasps at like, oh yeah, you could argue this D minor chord is part of One Winged Angel. I can't find any like really strong points that show it. But that's the only thing where it's like out of the whole storyline of 7 that we don't really see is we don't see that final ending of them going into the crater and fighting Sephiroth and kind of resolving it with the life stream, aside from the more heroic sound. If you want to say, oh, that could also be construed as like life stream came and saved us all. Aerith came and saved us all in some way. But yeah, it's a great overworld theme though. It's beautiful. It tells the story of 7 within 6 minutes if you listen for it hard enough, and it still holds up today really, really well.
What an incredible piece. Before we move to Final Fantasy VIII, I have an in-between transition piece for us, and because I apparently chose to make it a custom, actually I think it fits for our Overworld episodes to talk about Studio Ghibli and Joe Hisaishi. And because we really do love to torture Final Fantasy VIII fans. We'll get to it in just a second. But this is the piece that I think more for 7 and 8, and we'll see why. And it was actually one that Ryan mentioned once before for our 1 through 3 episodes, but I held off on it. I held it back to play it because I think it fits very nicely as almost a tonal in between the overworld pieces for Final Fantasy 7 and 8. And it is The Legend of Ashitaka from Princess Mononoke.
Nice little palate cleanser between 7 and the very different 8.
Right.
I love the part of that little theme where there's like kind of like a little breath moment. The da 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 da. Oh, that's the mark of a great composer when they use silence very well. A lot of because I've taught many students composition before, and there's always this tendency, even myself included, when I was a young composer and arranger, to always have something happening and always something new and always something, different, new themes. But having the sense of knowing when to just have silence is the mark of a really, really good composer.
Yeah. All right. That said, I think that's also a good transition into, frankly, what is my favorite overworld. If you take Terra's theme and put it into the category of character themes, Blue Fields from Final Fantasy VIII is my favorite overworld music in Final Fantasy.
Get ready for steel drums and pizzicato strings and weird tremolo vibraphone stuff. Completely different. that's it.
That's it. That's all of it.
By comparison to 7, that's it.
Yeah, it's 2 minutes it's 1 minute 25 seconds before it loops. There's enough going on though. There's a lot of weird, funky, interesting things going on in this one.
So Drew, tell us why, what about this, whether you want to use musical terms or non-musical terms, what about this makes this your favorite overworld theme?
Well, to start with, it uses those plucked strings as its momentum, as its tempo, right? We talked about the Final Fantasy IV music has that xylophone, right? That does a very driving tempo. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly how it goes.
That's my future ringtone right there, by the way.
Love it. Right. Or Final Fantasy VI are the ones that are marches, or Final Fantasy V is an upbeat rock tune, right? This feels like an alien landscape. This feels like Uematsu is scoring a planet unlike anything we've seen before, and it's walking, driving momentum rather than being the marching drums or any of the other things I just mentioned. Is bum 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 bum. It almost like when you see a moonwalk, right? When somebody is bum 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 bum, and you land, and then you float back up, and then you land back down. It's so funky.
It's weird, right? Ira, do you have anything to add before I start breaking this down?
Yeah, I was also going to invoke the moon theme from 4 a little bit, because it is, I think, deliberately quirky, and I'm not sure to what end. It also puts me in mind of the crazy old man music from 6 when you go see Gao's father, or there are a couple other times like the comic relief music. Did you ever watch Power Rangers, and when the Bulk and Skull would come on screen, they had their own. This is the
No, my
quirky
mom
bully
did not
theme.
let me watch Power Rangers as a kid.
Oh, okay, all right.
Ooh.
But the quirky bullies, the quirky comic relief characters had their own theme, and it feels a little bit like that. Maybe not all the way across that line, but it feels like a deliberate departure from what we've seen before.
Yeah, 8 is where, like, whenever you have like a master of anything, whether it's cooking, writing music, writing a story, driving a car, whatever, when you have a mastery of something, you eventually have learned how to use the rules so well that you then know how to break the rules. It's like when someone uses pepper in a dessert, it's like, why would you do that? Oh, because they know how to do it and it actually still works with the other elements around. This is where 8, which by the way is my favorite soundtrack in general that Uematsu ever did. I think it's the best soundtrack in all of gaming, even though 8 is nowhere near my favorite game in gaming. He has a mastery of saying, I know the rules, I know how to do this, but now we're going to take those elements and we're just going to get weird with it and make something that sounds like otherworldly. One of you said alien a minute ago, and that's how I always perceive 8's soundtrack, where there's parts of it that sound very more classical, like Liberi Fatali, or like various like town themes even, and then parts of it like this, or like Lunatic Pandora, or the Esthar theme, where it's like, what is going on here? Why is this so just out there? Here's a few things that, to start with this one, make it sound so unusual. First, can you hear my pizzicato string parts here?
Oh yeah.
Is that coming through all right? So when we hear this first part here, it's basically outlining a minor pentatonic melody where it's overlapping E flat major over a C minor bass line, which already is like kind of out there, but it works somehow. A lot of the melody is based around this. Whoops. And it feels like we're in some sense of either E major or E Lydian, or sorry, E flat major or E flat Lydian, which is itself a major key. And yet the bass part here is basing us in C minor. So we get together this weird sound. And there's not really a stable key you can lock in on. Add on to that all the way that the parts are played together, they're spaced out so far that it's not like a usual bass line where it's either just octaves and fifths, or it's like a very simple scale pattern of some kind. It's spaced out over the course of almost 2 entire octaves. And that's the bed that we're laying this on, which is really weird to do that. And then to have above it the weird like steel drum, vibraphone, pizzicato string, wow, 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 wow. And it's just like, where are we? So you take those elements and then you combine it with the fact that we're in this weird 6/8 time that doesn't really have a solid like I guess expectation to it, and it just feels like you're wandering, which makes sense because it's an overworld theme. You're wandering around.
Yeah.
Drew, I sense you have something to say.
No, this is all just coming together in a way that's making a whole lot of sense to me. The only other thing, I guess, that as you were saying that, I was saying this might even, I don't want to step on the next thing that you're going to say, but I was like, and then after doing all that, he starts trickling in all these weird little bits of kind of random melody or counter melody, including one of my favorite, most random phrases in all of Final Fantasy history that didn't need to be there. Just la, la. Which, like, I don't know, like a weird alien pterodactyl just flew by and you just went, oh, okay, yeah, dinosaurs are here next to deer and that giant bug creature and this guy whose gun is also a sword. And it, like, yeah, right, like I guess it all makes sense here on Bizarro Land.
That little like trickling down thing you just kind of saying through. I forget the exact notes. Give me a second to figure it out here real quick. Oh, too far. So does that sound familiar from anything else?
Yes.
What's it sound like? It comes from two sources that are both Nintendo games, and they're not Final Fantasy.
Oh, I'm gonna kick myself when you show me.
Okay, so we have this little melody here, which if I play it in C is just. Does that sound familiar at all?
It does, but I'm not.
Is it out of Zelda?
One of the references is from Zelda, and the other one's from a Mario game, actually.
Well, that's going to make me even more mad. Then I definitely should know it.
Buried in here somewhere.
Yeah.
So the Zelda one, it's the title screen from Ocarina of Time. Da, da, da,
okay.
And it's like a really big pastoral kind of like it's something like to like open the scene, and then you hear the other one. If you put it in the key of D, it's the warp whistle sound from Mario 3.
That's what was in my head that I wasn't placing. That's definitely, yeah.
Yeah, there's some sort of like weird like Japanese video game composer brotherhood where they sneak this, even though Koji Kondo did those two soundtracks, but one man. There's like you hear this little theme come up frequently, and I'm convinced that there's like some sort of weird brotherhood code where like other composers have used that same little thing of like small interval, big leap, and then chromatic fall down, because hey, wouldn't you know it, we're hearing it here again from Uematsu. We also heard it from Mitsuda in the Chrono Trigger soundtrack. We hear, I think it's in the Enchanted Forest theme, where it does that small interval and then up and then chromatic fall down a little bit. But we see this used frequently in that kind of 90s era of video game compositions. Cool. But yeah, like Drew was just saying, we hear these weird like little woodwinds appear. Then there's like bassoons and oboes doing these little and it's just like, where are we? What is going on here?
What's happening? When we started our series on Final Fantasy, I'm sure you heard us say this one, as I said, the weird one. And I call it, that's, and I say that with all love and respect. It's, they did the job, but yeah. I do, and it's because I like weird stuff, and I like that this piece often doesn't quite go exactly where you're expecting it to, and I prefer the fully orchestral one that they've done at the Distant Worlds and things like that. It makes some interesting stylistic choices and changes. It takes away, like you said, the steel drums, and it plays it on I think just straight up oboe. The strings get a little bit weirder with the flourishes and stuff, but it's also, I like the juxtaposition of weird and beautiful. I think this piece is, in addition to all the funky stuff it's doing, it's just got these long, beautiful string melodies over the top of it, especially with the way it reaches its climax after everything coming through. Because I guess a lot of times we associate alien or weird or different or those kinds of things with ugly or off-putting or those types of things. And this is not that. It's incredibly strange, but inviting in a way, and beautiful and kind of serene and peaceful, which is odd because it's a story about a bunch of child soldiers whose memories might arrive. Yeah. Weird.
Yeah, 8 is the weird one. You hit nail on the head. It's the weird one.
Can I play us one other piece of just fun classic video game music that uses pizzicato strings that everyone's going to know and love and want to hear for fun?
Please.
No.
Yeah. Like we're just going to say, no, absolutely not. Oh, speaking of Chrono Trigger, nice. So good.
Yeah. Similar thing where it's weird, but not nearly as weird, but beautiful. But it is trying to put you in a different place in time and slightly unsettle you. So I've always kind of felt like those two tracks were occupy a similar place in my brain anyway.
Yeah, for those at home, that's from Chrono Trigger. That's the 600 AD kind of overworld kind of general theme. And I always love how pizzicato strings, they just sound so like we've mentioned Lord of the Rings before on this series, and how it just sounds like you're off on an adventure, you're in the Shire, and you're kind of like going along your way at a very like pleasant pace, right? There's never when you play it in these kind of contexts, there's never anything that's very like urgent or very unsettling or, too calming. It's like pleasant motion is what I always get the feel of when you have a good melody, a good diatonic melody in pizzicato strings. Both of those songs do a great job with that.
And now for something on the complete opposite end of the tonal spectrum.
Yes, this is an odd episode today because we have 3 drastically different pieces.
that's lovely.
That's just so lovely. For listeners at home, that is the Final Fantasy IX overworld theme. It's called either Crossing Those Hills or Over the Hill. It's got a couple different terms for that. And I'll highly recommend, after you just listen to the version here, because I believe we mixed down this podcast in mono, listen to the original version in stereo, like with actual headphones on or with proper like stereo speakers, because those little jumpy bits, that little synthy sound, does what we call ping pong delay or ping pong like tracking, where it'll have a left channel and a right channel playing different notes at different times, like 100% left and right track. So I encourage you, listen to the official one in some stereo headphones, and you'll get the real effect for this. And it sounds like something just totally out there. It's such a cool effect, and yet still so calming at the same time somehow.
Yeah, it's such an interesting sound noise. I'm glad you, because that was going to be my first question. Like, hey, what's that? Was going to be my first question. Just, yeah, talk about a different home base, or a different, as you called it last time for 8, the bed that you make to let everything else sit in. And it's like, this is boopa doopa 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 doopa. Like, it's somehow groovy, but like electronic, but which is weird because, and the main melody is those bells. Very different from the Final Fantasy VII bells, I submit, for whatever reason. They're not as chimey dingy. It's not a light string attached to them. They're just happy fantasy bells of going on an adventure. And of course, the melody for this is the melody for Melodies of Life, which is a fun way to,
yes,
right?
Yep. If Drew hadn't gotten to it, that's like the biggest thing is the only melody proper we hear is the same melody as the song Melodies of Life, which you could argue is like the main theme of Final Fantasy IX. There's the beautiful, actually like sung quote unquote pop version of it that I swear the Distant Worlds version brings me to like a tear in my eye half the time I listen to it, because it's just the lyrics are so sad. I'm not going to mention them here though. Play Final Fantasy IX and just experience it on your own. Don't let us ruin it for you what happens in the game. But similarly, this one also sets up that unusual bed of like a very open sound setting, right? We don't have a simple, like 1s and 5s bass line. It's not simple scales. It's this really wide, synthy, echoey, just, we've used the term pastoral, open, pastoral type sound. Even the very first part here, I'm going to play it here on the piano. It starts off, I mean, this is an octave and a half spread from the very beginning. Like, that's a very wide gap. If you were to put that all more condensed into one octave, it might sound something slightly more like this, which is more, I guess, like easy to hear, but it sounds more constrained as a result, because it's obviously literally more constrained within one octave there. You add to that the left and right ping pong delay, you get even more of that spatial sound. There's some reverb added to it. That gives you some more spatial sound. And just the general nature of like, there's no real solid key either until the melody comes in. It's just this sort of, what's going on? And then, to use a term I think Drew said at the very start of this podcast, this sun coming up on a cold morning type thing, this one little string line, the very beginning, just holds one note and then it fades away. It's just a great way to start an overworld theme. It's so inviting.
I love that. I think it's also, we've talked about different ways that he uses these themes. Terra, the main character, is also an overworld theme. The Final Fantasy V one was the intro. It's like the first thing you hear when you boot it up, right? We talked about Sevens telling the whole story of the game, and also maybe being a stand-in for a theme for Cloud Strife. And this is the only one where like this main pop song, right? Now there's a little bit of technicality here, because you could say, well, 8 was the only one that was in contention if the future ones don't have overworlds. But there is an interesting way of, so Sutakidane is also repurposed instrumentally for area music a couple of times, at least one time very prominently in Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy XV begins as you set out on the overworld with its pop song that I know Ira has a gigantic mark for, Florence and the Machine's version of Stand By Me. Right. And Final Fantasy XVI uses My Star, I don't think ever as area music, but in a similar way that Final Fantasy IX does, it hints at the full piece throughout the entire game. So in the story, and again, we're not going to spoil the whole thing, and I think we're going to have to do a future episode on Melodies of Life itself, or on the vocal tracks. We'll get fully demonetized for that one, but it'll be fun. But we hear Melodies of Life in its melodic forms a number of different ways, including an early scene in the game, right, where Zidane wakes up and someone's singing it. Someone, I'll just leave it there, right, is diegetic, a diegetic piece of music. As is Eyes on Me, right? It exists inside the world, but this one is a piece of music they know, that they talk about, and we don't hear the full vocal pop version until the very end, but it's been with us the whole time because it's also the overworld music.
Yeah, and for those of us at home, diegetic is the term that's like, I was calling it hyper programmatic in recent episodes. Diegetic is something that's happening in the actual scenario there. And like Drew just said, yes, there is a very prominent scene in 9 where we hear someone literally in the game singing this melody, which makes it diegetic, makes it hyper programmatic, and makes it something that means a lot to the story of the game. It's one of the, maybe not like major plot points, but it's like a major turning point for some of the characters. Leave it at that, something like that.
Yeah.
Ira, what are your thoughts on Crossing Those Hills?
Yeah, a lot of the stuff I was going to say was already said. I was going to compare it to Terra's theme also because it's an overworld theme that could be tied to a specific character. But the biggest difference, I think, for me is the drums. I feel like in Terra's theme, that's a march, right? We're marching on Narsh, and then we're out in the overworld theme. It still feels like a march. Whereas this one, it's got that drum. It feels like a snare drum, something or other under there. But it does not feel to me like Semper Fi. It feels to me like I'm not sure what.
Yeah, it's just kind of got this like more pop music, Phil Collins sounding, hi-hat. It's more syncopated, it's more upbeat, and it's not just snare drum, snare drum, snare drum playing an actual march part, right? This little part here is also interesting because when you think about the time when this game was made, it was in production in the late 90s, and I think it came out in 2000, if I'm correct. Do you guys remember the release year for
right.
Final Fantasy IX?
Yeah,
2000. So when it came out then, another game we mentioned on the podcast on the Phoenix Downbeat series before, what other really prominent Square RPG on the PS1 came out around that time that has a similar sounding soundtrack?
Oh, is it not Xenogears? That's earlier.
It would have been like 97 or 98, I think, is when it came out.
Oh, geez.
And it has music that you could take this song and just put it right in that game, and it would sound perfectly fitting.
I don't know. I'm going to kick myself when you say it again. I'm sure of it. What do you think? I don't know.
Ira especially is going to kick himself.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a Chrono Cross?
Chrono Cross. Chrono Cross. Because there's a few instrumental things that we're doing here. We have hi-hat and like kind of shaker percussion being emphasized. We have a really simple to grasp melody that's in a very sweet, almost synthesized flute sort of sound. And there's also this kind of like fretless synth bass or fretless envelope bass playing the bass line when the bass line actually comes in this version. Boom, 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 boom. And those are all things that Chrono Cross did in most of the soundtrack.
Yeah.
Different composers between Chrono Cross and Final Fantasy VIII. But it really feels like, to me, Uematsu heard the things that Chrono Cross did really well and said, hey, I want to use those sound samples and those effects that they did there. Maybe I can put them in my game a little bit. And I suspect he used a lot of those things directly here, primarily in Crossing Those Hills, in 9's overworld music.
Yeah. No, yeah, definitely kicking myself. I should have got that one. I love Chrono Cross soundtrack especially, but I love the game, but I especially love the soundtrack.
Yeah, it's like one of those, like, I forget the exact song that's in my head that I can hear like the sound profile for, but there's one that sounds like it could have easily just led into this song or the other way around.
So one of the other fun things that we get to do here and have done a couple of times is share some remasters or remakes or rearrangements or covers, whatever your word for them are. And our Harpsiboard on the old YouTubes has been a friend of ours for a minute, and I sometimes put her stuff on to help the kiddo fall asleep. And I've always enjoyed her stuff, so I wanted to give her a quick shout out and play her version of this piece. What do we think?
Yeah, she's great, and she also just a couple days as of when we're recording this a little bit after Halloween of the year that we're recording this, and she put out, actually, I think it was Succession of Witches. She did a recording
Excellent.
of for Halloween that was pretty solid.
Yeah, she's great. She's got some of those, like we talked about John Oath before. If you want some long, relaxing playlists to put on while you study or put your 1-year-old to sleep, check out Harps Aboard.
So good. I love that harp sound.
She's it's such a pleasant, and again, we've talked about before, it's like so Final Fantasy. That instrument more than any other always makes me think of Final Fantasy.
Yep, that prelude theme, we hear it for various character themes, location themes. It really is like the thing that Uematsu latched onto early in the game's history and just kept using it over and over and over again. And the later composers for 10 through 16 and the offshoot games, they also use harp regularly in really clever ways.
Yeah. So Ira, we've been watching a lot of Reading Rainbow lately, which I know you do, and some of the old ones. Mm-hmm. And you remember at the end they would go back through everything that we learned and did today, right? Mm-hmm. Some of the big lessons of the day. And I'm sitting here going, okay, so first we did Hollywood Batman heroes have to do an entire storyline in 6 minutes of the rise and fall and the end of the world and the apocalypse. And then we went to an alien landscape that none of us could fully identify entirely, but we found to be incredibly pleasing anyway. And we ended on a pop song mm-hmm. with it just This is the journey that we've gone on today, and the one that Uematsu took us on in his PS1 Overworld music.
Yeah. In education, we would call this a closer, right? You want something to button the lesson, to help fix it in the long-term memory, and maybe hint at what's to come, or get them to reflect on their own thoughts. I don't know that I've got a button for the overworlds of 7, 8, and 9, or for that matter, for the whole trio of it, right? 1 to 9. The only thing I can think of is that you want to set a tone, or at least Uematsu seemed to want to set a tone, whether or not that tone was a microcosm of the entire story, or an overview of the entire story, or maybe emphasizing a particular character or a particular feeling of the oppressiveness, or the we're going on an adventure, or the gates of hell have opened. Whatever it is, he's trying to set us in a place, give us an attitude, a theme, a feeling that we're going to hear several times throughout. And I think that's got to be a tall order.
Yeah, making overworld themes, if there's anything for any aspiring composers, arrangers at home listening can take from this, it's that these are 3 drastically different takes on this sort of thing. There really is no way I can think of either to kind of button end the 3 of these in particular together, because they're just so different. But that just goes to show you, A, he's a genius, take your shot, and also how many right ways there are to do this, to do an overworld theme. What's your goal? What's the tone that you're trying to set? What's the aim of the music you're doing, that you're making, and what are you trying to pursue, and what sort of feelings are you trying to evoke from the listener, assuming they didn't even know anything about the game to begin with.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and thank you to everyone who has reached out to us. Feel free to let us know what we missed, got wrong, or should have mentioned, plus any questions you may have, or any piece you would like to hear in the future, down in the comments. Make sure you are subscribed to Everything is Final Fantasy on Patreon, YouTube, and all social media platforms, and please do the same for Airship Overdrive, Ryan's project where you can hear arrangements of some of your favorite video game music. Be sure to join us next time when we dream of a man with a machine gun. Boom. Maybe the melodies of our lives were the friends we made along the way. No, I'm cutting my life.
Keep it in.